going to get it started with Brandon's question. He said, what's it ever going to take for Auburn to compete with Bama and Georgia and LSU? And I sat back and I thought, and I said, they already do. Don't beat them every year. There aren't many teams out there that are going to beat. There aren't many teams out there that get a chance to beat those teams. But even if they did get an opportunity every year or task, depending on your perspective, I don't think there are many teams out there this side of the NFL capable of pulling that off. But then it got me to thinking, this reminds me when I used to be where I am tonight in Columbus, and I used to be right in Auburn's backyard. There were a lot of Auburn fans, a lot of Auburn grads, a lot of former Auburn players reside in Columbus. We'd be around him all the time. So it always struck me the longer Malzahn was at Auburn. In 2013, everyone loved him because he went national championship first year or to the national championship game. But since then, slowly but surely, people have found ways to sort of chip away at the veneer. Sometimes deserved, sometimes not, in my estimation. But what always struck me and continues to this day to strike me is it's a very unique situation because the Auburn situation is sort of the inverse of what is typical. You have more criticism of the head coach there the closer you get to the program, and you have more praise and admiration and respect for the coach the further away you get from the program. If I were to walk in, an airport in Omaha, Nebraska, and say, "Hey, what you think about Gus Malzahn?" If I'm talking to a college football fan, they'll say, "Man, he's probably not one of the 5 best coaches in America, but I mean, he's pretty good. He's beaten Nick Saban a couple of times, and ooh, they got it rough down there." And probably what they'd do if they were familiar with the theory of relativism is they would say, "But you know what? If Malzahn was the coach in the ACC, or if he was at a G5 school, and I wonder what his record would be." And so that's kind of the way I've always thought about Malzahn. Not above reproach, not without blame, not without criticism. No one is. But I want you to think about some of this. I think, and I'm not going to do this segment tonight, I've done this several times, but I think Gus Malzahn has the hardest college football job in America. Now, it is a lot easier to win at Auburn than it is Morehead State. And to be honest with you, I don't even know if they have a football program. Please understand what I'm saying. Relative to expectation level and difficulty of schedule every year, that is what makes Auburn football and Gus Malzahn, being the head coach at Auburn, the toughest job in America. Here's what I mean by that. Only recently did they change the structure of the scheduling. The SEC scheduling changes this year, but yet it's still going to be hard for Auburn. Up until this point, think of what the task at hand is if you're the head coach at Auburn. They have sky high expectation because they have sky high investment level. They invest emotionally and financially to the same degrees as other programs around them. Talked about this a million times on this show, even back when we were independent. So because of that, they expect elite return on investment, which is fair. I don't have a problem with that. I want you to consider what task that has meant for Auburn. In a typical year, up until this season, and really it doesn't change because I think they have like A&M or Alabama, LSU, Bama back-to-back at the end of the year. Maybe that's A&M. Auburn has 2 tough games to end the year this year too. But up until this point, if you're going to win a national championship at Auburn, in all likelihood, here's what you have to do up until this year. You will have had to beat Georgia. That's a top 5 caliber team. You will have had to have beaten Alabama. That's a top 5 caliber team. You probably have to face Georgia again in Atlanta, or if not Georgia, someone who is better than Georgia. That's another top 5 caliber team. You got to go to a semifinal game, and you got to beat, obviously, a top 4 team. That's 4. And then you got to win the national championship game against a top 5 caliber team. You're having to win 5 games in the final 6 games of your season, because there's a cupcake normally between the Georgia and Alabama games. But 5 of your final 6 games in the period of time where you can't afford to slip up is against the top 5 caliber team. Who is that? And come out on the other end unscathed. That's what makes the Auburn. I didn't even mention LSU because they play them earlier in the year. I didn't mention A&M. Half the time they play a pretty darn good out-of-conference opponent. So I didn't even mention all that. Just think about the last 5 weeks. So I want you to focus on the pivot job. So see, my argument has been and will continue to be Malzahn's pretty criminally underrated the closer you get to the Auburn football program. Think about adaptation. When Malzahn got to Auburn in 2013, a lot of people watched what he was doing, and it was like I always equate it to just walking up behind someone and slapping them in the back of the head. kind of what his offense did down here. Even the coaches who knew what he was doing, they couldn't really do anything to stop it because they didn't have the athletes to do it. A lot of people had recruited to stop a power run game forever. And so you had a bunch of 6'3", 255-pound linebackers trying to run 53 and a third yards sideline to sideline, and it was ugly. It was really ugly. And he goes to the SEC championship, they win it. He goes to the national championship game, come that close against Jimbo Fisher and Jameis Winston. But it was a great year, 1 year removed from that program going 4-8. So everyone's excited. And they put up some good offensive numbers, but then slowly conference starts to recruit to catch up with not just Auburn, but overall stylistically the way things were changing. Auburn was just part of that. And so you fast forward 4 years, and Alabama and Georgia and LSU, well, now their linebackers are 6'2", 225, 230 in the inside spots, and they've got terrors off the edge at outside linebacker and those hybrid spots and defensive end. Even the defensive tackles can get after the passer. And so all of a sudden now, speed is not necessarily the advantage for you that it used to be. So whether it was by accident, dumb luck, or by design, Malzahn goes and hires a defensive coordinator. He's still there. His name's Kevin Steele. Guys, I know today, Kevin Steele, I think right now, as of this moment, he may be the highest paid defensive coordinator in America. If not, he's right there because they just gave him an extension. At the time Gus Malzahn brought him in, it really didn't raise many eyebrows. Steele had been around. He had been at Alabama. He had been at several places, okay? So it wasn't like this hotshot new defensive coordinator. Hey, did you hear about this guy Malzahn's taking a chance on? Kevin Steele had been around the block. No one was scared of Kevin Steele. They respected him, but he was not feared by any sense or any stretch of the imagination. And then all of a sudden, the identity of Auburn football changed. Because what happened is we started seeing inconsistency offensively. You bring Chip Lindsey in, and it's ugly at times. And Malzahn, is it his offense? Is it someone else's offense? But all the while, Auburn remains competitive, and Auburn remains a contender, not winning SEC championships every year, but being a contender. And the reason they did it is because Kevin Steele just kind of quietly sits over there with his knee propped up, whistling, sort of bouncing a pogo ball back and forth, and his defense is top 15, then top 10, then top 5. And Auburn looks like they did in the early 2000s, playing a brand of football you didn't think that teams could play if they had that kind of offense. And so there was a nice little pivot done once the league started to adjust to Malzahn, and there was a pivot done by that Auburn coaching staff that kept him as a contender. But you really don't need to look any further than the Nick Saban factor to talk about how I think underrated Gus Malzahn is. Malzahn's beaten Saban 3 times. He's been there since 2013. He beat him in 2013. He beat him in 2017. He beat him just this past year in 2019. Odd number years are Auburn's friend against the University of Alabama. Combined, sorry, I just bumped the mic there. Combined, the rest of the SEC, take away Alabama, they can't beat themselves. Take away Auburn, take them out of the equation. There are 12 other programs in the SEC. Combine all the head coaches down here. Do you know how many other head coaches right now that are active in the SEC have a win over Nick Saban? 1. I'm holding up the one finger for those of you listening. And that would be Edward Orgeron, and he just did it this past year. That leaves, by my estimation, 11 other programs out there with head coaches who have never beaten him. One of them that just did it like 5 minutes ago, and then Gus Malzahn, who's done it 3 times. He also has to live in the same state as Nick Saban, therefore recruit in the same state as Nick Saban. And Auburn's done pretty good in state. They haven't beaten Alabama head-to-head for many kids in state. They have done it a time or two. They haven't done it consistently. They got to go into Georgia and recruit. Guess who's over there? Kirby Smart. You try to go into East Texas and recruit, and Texas A&M doing a pretty darn good job out there, and so is Texas, even if they haven't necessarily won with them. LSU, you used to have a lot of success down in Louisiana. LSU's down there right now. What in the world did they just do? They just won a national championship. So think about what it takes to win in this sport. They must have immaculate facilities, right? Nice facilities. They're not running circles around anyone in the SEC. Very rarely when you ask someone, hey, best facilities in the SEC, go. Very rarely is Auburn going to crack anyone's top 4. Top 5? What is it that stands out? I mean, there's got to be like when you coach at Oregon and you win there, people always say, yeah, but they got the Nike factor. What does Auburn have? What advantage behind the scenes that we don't know about does Gus Malzahn have? So there are a lot of things working against him there is all I'm saying. And I think with all that considered, I think he's done a pretty good job. Now, as soon as I suggest that, I'll look in the comments, mark my words, and people are going to point out all kinds of negatives that are just fact and not understand that, okay, that's your con list. You forgot the pros list over here because there are quite a few pros too. And anytime someone criticizes their coach, I don't have a problem with it, especially when you do what you're asked. Auburn fans do what they're asked. They show up and they support and they give. So anytime you do that, I've said it about Georgia a million times. I don't have a problem with your sky high expectations. Whether they're realistic or not, that's another conversation. I don't have a problem with them, but here's what I do ask kindly, respectfully, who are you going to get to do it better? Because it's easy for part A of that conversation, the let's get rid of this guy, let's run him out of town on a rail. The part B, well, now we got a vacancy. Who's going to fill it? That's tough. And not just who's going to fill it, you could find a warm body to fill it. To justify getting rid of a head coach in any situation that doesn't involve scandal, you've got to have someone who can't just come in and do an equal job. They got to come in and do a better job. So who's going to do it better than Gus Malzahn? I haven't found anyone. I haven't found any realistic candidates. I mean, I know this last year, I had folks try to preach to me that Urban Meyer was on the table. No, he wasn't. No, he wouldn't be. I don't think I really, I don't think I need to detail why he wouldn't be. So there's a better situation at Auburn right now than I think a lot of people realize.